celebrating the power of possibility. Pilot Flying J and Halloran Hilton Hill present Anything is Possible. Today's guest, John B. Rogers Jr., Part 1.
Welcome to another edition of Anything is Possible. I'm Halloran Hilton Hill. This is John Rogers. Our program is called Anything is Possible, and I've been wanting to have you on the show because I was down on Market Square, and so here's this shop. I don't know what it is, I don't know why it is, I just know I like it. I see these trikes in there, or big wheels, or what do you call them?
They're trikes, really. They're drift trikes.
And I said, who's behind this? What is this? Why would you put a storefront here? There's so much creativity going on here. Somebody's trying something, and it sparked everything creative in me, right? So welcome to the broadcast, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Halloran.
Who are you?
You know, I want to be an innovator, and I'm trying all the time to do that. And it's such great praise for you to say you saw our store on Market Square here, and that it made you feel like wonderful things were coming out of it. I kind of feel a little bit like I want to be Willy Wonka.
And when I walked in, I'm looking at all the different things in the store. I didn't know who you were or what was behind it at all. I had no knowledge. But, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, what hit me first was this storefront isn't about the stuff that's in it. It's about the ideas that would put it here to begin with. It was about ideas and innovation. Was that the?
That's true. We are an innovation company that's built and driven by the community around the world. And so we started out as an open source vehicle creation platform. We're powered by the crowd. And so we have an amazing number of ideas that come through, 60,000 on the site at any one time, and microfactories to put them to rights, to be real. And so it's really just a rapid product innovation engine for vehicular things, and it can be from drift trikes to cars to now drones, and it's possible today.
Why are you that way?
For me, it started. I was a platoon commander in Iraq, and two of my friends were killed in 2004. And I had some young boys, and I really thought I could stay here and I could go home dead, or I could make a difference in the world and stop the dependence on oil. And so that was my first driver. Apolitical about it. I just didn't want to be fighting for stability, for energy, you know, in places where the plutocracy just didn't care about the downstream effects of the economy we were in. And that sounds like a big thought, but it struck me very hard that we had spent 100 years building up a vehicle infrastructure which was voracious in its consumption of oil, of fossil fuels. And nobody was really doing anything about it. If you looked around, you'd had Toyota Priuses and you had all these other things, but you still had people going to the pump all the time. And I thought, this isn't going to change unless somebody stands up and does something about it. And I was a maker as a kid. My granddad owned the Indian Motorcycle Company. It was not a successful business for him, but it was something where I was like, wow, he really made motorcycles. And so I wanted that challenge, and I had seen what the downstream effects were of not fixing it as a Marine, and I just said, I'm going to do it. And so dumb enough to start, and just barely optimistic enough to believe I could be successful.
Is it dumb to start?
You know,
or courageous?
It is. They're two sides of the same coin. I think that, you know, one of the reasons why children learn is because their body doesn't stop them from doing courageous things, and they teach them themselves. And I think as an entrepreneur in this country, we have set up the structure to be able to let people dare. And so you could call it dumb, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but you are doing things that you are going to fail. It's just a question of whether you can pick yourself back up and read the signs and keep moving. Yeah,
it's interesting that on the walls at Facebook, they've got this phrase, fail faster.
Right.
And Sheryl Sandberg really pushes that because she's like, if you fail faster, it means you're trying more stuff and you're going to get to something great if you fail faster. So,
yeah, there's, Wayne Gretzky was, you lose 100% of the shots on goal that you don't take.
Right.
Or another way, Tom Watson at IBM was famous for saying success lies at the other end of failure. And there are aphorisms and people who talk about it. I got particularly interested in how to live it. And when it's hardware, not software, the failures are real and meaningful. If you build a product that fails at 60 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour, it's catastrophic potentially. And yet, if you don't try, then you get what we have today, which is incremental innovation, where the 2014 model car that you have has a heated seat with one more cell than the 2015 car of the same model. That's not innovation.
Right. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about your life because pre-game you were talking about spending, did you say 7 years on a boat?
Yeah.
I want to kind of deconstruct how you found the liberty, the personal liberty to try things and to do stuff and to be a maker, because I think it informs you being here today. This is John Rogers. The company is Local Motors. This is Anything is Possible because he's anything is possible. We'll be back.
Possibility powered by Pilot Flying J, Covenant Health, Home Federal, and the Knoxville News Sentinel. Coming up.
My advisor said, nobody does cars anymore. Chemical engineering, computer science, those kinds of things. And I said, nope, I want to do mechanical engineering and I want to work on cars. And he said, well, you'll end up designing door handles in the basement of, Dearborn factory. And he was right.
Welcome back to Anything is Possible. I'm Halloran Hilton Hill, and this is John Rogers with Local Motors. You spent 7 years on a boat, so you asked me, you said, where are you from? And I said, well, my dad was a minister. We moved about every 5 to 7 years, so I populated a lot of places. Well, I need to change the way I just said that.
I want to change the way you said it, but I get it.
I lived in a lot of different places. Yeah. I haven't populated a lot of places. But you said, you kind of moved around. Tell me your story.
I had a father who was a real estate executive, but he always dreamed of being a ship captain. And still my dad today, still alive, wonderful man, and very inspirational. And I was the youngest of 5 kids. He and my mom had me when they were about 41 years old. And so by the time I was 13, they were ready to retire or getting close to it. And they still wanted to do something epic. And so sold our house and they built a boat. And so my dad had made a lot of money at the time, so he was able to build a big boat. And his dream was to oversee the building of it, be involved in mocking it up, planning it, hired a naval architect.
Did you watch all of this?
The whole thing. Took 3 years. And he in fact hired a woodworker and to build a mock-up, full-size, in a barn of this boat and to plan it out with him. He was deeply engaged in it. And this is very much part of my life. I'm not afraid at all to talk about I had a dad who had done well for himself and he was wealthy and he made it happen. Because that's sort of part of why I'm here today. He built a boat and we saw the world from the sea for 7 years, starting in Japan, which is where the boat was built. And so learning that culture over 3 years as that was going forward, and then transiting all the way back around the world to come back to the European area, to the Mediterranean and the Middle East. That was my education in that period of time. But then what ended up happening is I was just sort of setting the stage for what I was gonna do. And my father and mother had a very significant financial reversal and lost everything.
Lost everything?
Lost everything. And so we ended up going from that world of just sort of, amazing freedom and engagement, so different than seeing the world from airports, to coming back and trying to figure out, what was I gonna make out of my life? And my brothers and sisters helped put me through college. And then after I left, it was sort of like I'd seen all these great things, but now what was I gonna make of my life? And I think part of being on a boat really teaches you to be self-reliant, no matter how big it is. If it's 60 feet or 1,000 feet, you're a small top on the ocean. And so fixing things when they break is critical to know. And I was always down in the engine room, it was a sailboat, and we sailed most of the time, but we had a crew, and I was fascinated by everything that allowed this thing to move. And that's what really, was one of the major influences that got me going.
So you decided to go to school. What did you study in school and where did you study?
That's also part of things. I went to Princeton and was lucky enough to get in, and I wanted to do mechanical engineering because I wanted to work on cars.
Right.
And I showed up first day, and my advisor said, nobody does cars anymore. You know, this is 1990s, and you are in the wrong business. Chemical engineering, computer science, those kinds of things. And I said, nope, I want to do mechanical engineering, and I want to work on cars. And he said, well, you'll end up designing door handles in the basement of, Dearborn factory. And he was right. At the time, that is exactly what your career looked like. It was very stratified.
Right.
Cars were a massive system. They weren't sort of go build one. Or you go to a race team and work on a race car. And even those are really massive systems, if you will, of rules and whatnot. So at the end of my time at Princeton, I transitioned in my last year to say I was, not going to do it anymore. I thought things looked bleak, and this is really when STEM education was not very cool. 1995, we just hadn't figured that out in the country. There was no push. There was no brass ring for me to be like, wow, I'm going to go make stuff. And it's funny how that happens, and we're now only 20 years beyond that, but 20 years ago, it just wasn't like that. So I left and I tried to find a job. I ended up going to China, and I went to a medical products business where I was making stuff. And I was making diabetic medical testing kits. It was pretty cool. There was chemical reagents, and we were putting them on strips, and we were cutting them up to a precise size and making finger pricker devices. And there were tons of diabetics in China because everyone's moving to a city and the diets were changing and that kind of thing. So it was real business, helping people, building something that needed to have exactitude, and it was satisfying. It wasn't what I wanted to stay doing, but that was my education sort of through college and then trying to find out how to make something. And then I came back to the United States. I didn't want to live in China. I'd enjoyed it, but came back to the US and I worked as a banker, which was totally boring. I never want to do that in my life. I found out after 3 years of it.
You got a good banker look, though.
No,
you
thanks.
can pull it off.
I can pull it off. I can fake it pretty well. And so I did that for 3 years, and then I met a guy. He was an amazing guy, African-American general in the US Army, and I had dinner with him, and he was in the fund where I was working. And, a real pathfinder, amazing guy. And at one dinner with
What's
him.
his name?
His name was Hugh. Last name I don't remember.
Right.
And I didn't know our LPs very well. And but the dinner was forever meaningful to me because he sat down, he said, young man, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, well, sir, I work for you at this fund, this bank fund. And he said, that wasn't what I asked. He said, what do you want to do in life? And he said, where do you want to see yourself? And I said, well, I want to run a company. And he said, well, are you getting there? And I said, no, not right now. And he said, well, why don't you go join the service? And I said, what would that get me? And he said, real leadership. When was the last time you ever led anybody? And or was ever really led by somebody in a stressful situation? And I said, I don't know that that's ever happened to me, that specific question. And he said, well, if you join the service, what branch would you join? Do you know anything about it? And I said, I don't know that much, but I think I'd be a Marine. And the God's honest truth, the next day at work, a Marine showed up in his dress blues to take me out to lunch. And this general had a lot of friends in the military. He was retired at the time, and he sent a Marine recruiter to take me out to lunch. And I'm a banker, and I'm wearing a suit, and I went out and got hoagies with this Marine recruiter, and 3 months later I was in the Marine Corps.
That is an unbelievable story. So now it seems like you're a maker from the very beginning, because if we go back to this barn where this full-size mock-up is being made, and you're watching from soup to nuts, something being made for a purpose.
True.
Right.
True.
So we're making something to take us around the world.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to make something with utility. Mm-hmm. Right. This is not just craft. Mm-hmm. So you watch that from soup to nuts. And you live this life where adventure is the norm. The safe thing is the weird thing. Adventure is the normative behavior. The military seems like an absolute, but it seems like everything in your life is staging you for the next thing.
I mean, I think I do. Oprah says I don't believe in luck. I believe in opportunity meeting preparation, and I think you're right. Like, you have to have opportunity. You have to be prepared. And for me, I didn't know that I was willing to be a businessman or a risk taker, an entrepreneur, or that my making desires would be good in what I would do. It just all came down to be the right time, and I feel very lucky about that.
I think what happens to us is, when you do things, you are awakened to things. So the same opportunities are in the room. They're always there. It's just, if I do A, B, and C, A awakens something, B awakens something, and C awakens something, and then all of a sudden, where you wouldn't have had or heard the conversation the way you did with the general had you not had a life of adventure. Adventure wouldn't be appealing to you, right?
It's true. So my thoughts, so I agree 100%, and I would add some other sort of riffs on that. There are a lot of people that believe email and the internet and the ability to be able to push broadband through bigger pipes is really going to solve a lot of problems about communication. But touch, taste, and smell are things we don't get through the phone or the computer.
Right.
And when you talk about building on experiences, engaging all five senses is super important. And if you engage them in children early on, I talked about my grandfather a little bit, he owned the Indian Motorcycle Company, but the greatest passion he had in life, he had this wild hair idea, and maybe that's genetic between him and me. He believed in public television, and he created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in the United States. And so
Wow.
he and Joan Cooney created Children's Television Workshop, and that begot Sesame Street. He loved early childhood education. And when you have those experiences way young, he got this hankering, like, it needs to be before you can talk, reading to kids before they can talk and those sorts of things. Touch, taste, smell, hear, see, all of those things, the five senses engaged throughout your life are pretty critical. And I think it is true, relying on that and seeing things opens up doors. At Local Motors, we have this phrase, in order to innovate, you must make. And that is really true. If you don't get in there and start making something, you can't figure out what innovation is. And we have suffered from that in America for several generations. We became a service economy where sort of doctors, lawyers, bankers, and we stopped making because we believe we had outclassed making.
Wow.
And I go back to the day where Jay Gould and John Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie and all of the people, Henry Flagler, who were building the railroads and the buildings and the cities and all these things. There was one banker, John Pierpont Morgan.
Right.
All the rest of them were out there making something.
Right.
Today you go to New York, you can't find anybody making something,
Right.
and everyone's a banker. And that's a problem. And I really saw when we got the 99%, 1% thing going on while I was in Iraq and, everybody's back, fighting about it, I was like, good on them. It's time to throw out the service providers and get back some people who are actually making stuff.
Wow. Let's take a break. I'm loving this conversation. I'm so glad you're here. This is Anything is Possible because it is.
Coming up.
My parents losing their financial wherewithal was a big shock for me. And it's an important part of my life. And I'm so thankful that it happened.
Welcome back to Anything is Possible. I'm Halloran Hill. This is John Rogers. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so in your story, you spent time on a boat, you go to Princeton, you become a banker, you go to China, you meet a general, you end up becoming a Marine, if my notes are correct, or if I heard correct, you were a sniper?
Yeah.
How'd that happen?
Everything in my life had been in following sort of my brothers and sisters. I was the youngest of five. And so, I had a charmed life. My parents losing their financial wherewithal was a big shock for me. And it's an important part of my life. And I'm so thankful that it happened. Going to the Marine Corps, though.
Like the bottom dropped out.
The bottom dropped
gone.
out.
Like millions of dollars gone.
Gone. And what are you going to do?
An order of magnitude of what? 20 million, 30 million, 100 million?
If we're talking about it, my dad was probably, he was worth in excess of $50, $100 million, more than you'd ever need, and then, down to zero. And so,
and that life is a different life because I have friends. I don't live that life, but I have friends. I remember asking one of my very wealthy friends if he knew what it was like to pick up a paycheck. And he said, I gotta be honest with you, I don't know what the 1st and the 15th is about.
Yeah.
I know we pay people, but I personally never think, okay, when the check comes Friday, then I can pay the
So I've been there, and I'm so thankful for having been in both places, because I think if you don't understand what it means to achieve wealth and what you can do with it, it's hard to train yourself to know what to do. And that is an important thing to know, how to be a good steward. And servant leadership is critical to know how to do that. And if you've never been in the place where you really are worried about how you're going to put food on the table, you don't know what that's like.
Right.
And I think people should have both. How you get that to your children when you're in one place or the other, meaning if you have nothing, how do you get them everything? Or if you have everything, how do you get them nothing? Those are huge problems. Yeah. And so I'm thankful for having had both. I always remember that they can both always happen, and I think that makes me a good leader at work, to really be able to see both sides of that equation. And I think as an entrepreneur, one of my great mentors and investors in my business today, he said, you're sort of one part optimistic and one part pessimistic.
Yeah.
Andy Grove recently died, the founder of Intel, and he
said, "Stay paranoid.
Stay paranoid. Only the paranoid survive."
Yeah.
And that's a rough way to live, but if you can keep it in balance, it's pretty good.
So when I heard you were a sniper, this is what I thought, and we'll have to take a break and get the answer to this coming up, or get your response to this. Snipers have to focus. And I wonder, in your sniper training, if that was a transferable business skill. In other words, here's where we're going. I see exactly where it is, and nothing else distracts. And I'm calm, and my breathing is centered. And so if you would consider that, because I would love to know if that transferred, because on part 2 of our interview, I want to talk about you making the leap to be an entrepreneur and start Local Motors, and just cast this vision of possibility. So consider that. John Rogers is here, and we'll continue with part 2 next time.